Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so in this video, I'd like to continue with the Chad Daybell series. Okay, and here I want to address what I think is a very interesting question and something that I think is bothering a lot of people, including me. Okay, and that is the question of whether and to what extent John Pryor is actually a good lawyer. Okay, I think we all can agree he may not be very likable, but the real question is he a good lawyer and what is his strategy? Maybe not so much in terms of the specific defense, but what is his strategy in terms of his personality and his demeanor in court? Okay, I think that's a very important question. And just as a warning, okay, this is not going to be my most eloquent video. I'm just not feeling eloquent today. And let me just also say, I work in criminal defense. Okay, I used to be an attorney. I used to be a civil litigating attorney. I used to work in law firms, like civil law firms. After about 10 years of working as an attorney, I did forfeit my licenses. Okay, and I just went into working just as a law clerk, and basically I do research and I also do consulting. I do strategy consulting with criminal defense attorneys, and most of the work I do is in federal criminal defense, but I also do some assistance and some consulting with criminal defense in the state of Florida. Okay, so I do have, and in that I have about 13 years of experience. Okay, so I've been around the law for a long time, well over 20 years. Okay, and I've worked very hard in criminal defense for about 13 years. Okay, so I'm just going to talk off the top of my head, and believe me, I have been involved in some very complicated cases. In federal criminal defense, we do a lot of hardcore violent crimes, but we also do very complex white collar crimes. Okay, so I've been involved in all aspects of criminal law, and I have been involved in homicide cases as well. Okay, so what is my first impression of John Pryor? Okay, my first impression, just as somebody who I have been around the law for a long time, okay, my first impression is that John Pryor does know his way around a courtroom. Okay, he doesn't just look confident, and he's not just pretending. He really does know his way around the courtroom, and he really does seem to be pretty not just knowledgeable, but he seems to be comfortable in the courtroom. And I think honestly, I think his overall seasoning and skill level, okay, the overall seasoning and skill level, I think he is probably better than any of the prosecutors in terms of seasoning and skill level. I think he has more comfort, and I think he's able to get beyond just kind of knowing the law and knowing the evidence law and knowing how to handle witnesses. He's at that level where he can do it like jazz, where he can just do it by instinct. Whereas I think you can see that with all of the prosecutors, they're kind of having to regurgitate, oh, do I know this rule? Do I know that rule? And so they're still kind of in that rule following, like sight reading, as opposed to playing jazz. Where I think John Pryor, he's just doing it like effortlessly. It just comes across like they say in music, you get to the point where you can do like improvisation, like jazz improvisation. He's just naturally being himself in the courtroom, and he doesn't have to think so hard about the rules of evidence and all that. So I think what I would say is that John Pryor has more experience and he's more fluency. He's more fluent, I think, in the law. And so you can see that he has an advantage in the sense of just being kind of an old timer, someone who really is seasoned in the law and someone who really knows the law and knows the rules of evidence and also knows how to operate in a courtroom. Okay. And of course, because he's been around a lot, like any old timer, he sort of knows he can sort of how do you say, when you play basketball a lot, right? You cannot be a good basketball player if you don't foul a little bit. You got to always be on the edge of fouling and fouling and fouling. That's just how good competitors compete. Okay. And I know a lot of people, they think, well, like a courtroom is like it's like this sacred chamber where we have to follow the rules and we have to do everything perfectly. No. Lawyers, they press at the limits. Okay. The good ones, they press the limits and they let the other side object, but they're going to press hard and they're going to foul a little bit, and they'll let the judge and the other attorney put them in check, but they're intentionally playing very aggressive games. So that comes from experience, and some people can do it better than others, I'll admit. Some people don't have quite the unlikability of John Pryor, so they can get away with a little more. Okay, let's compare, for example. Let's look back at some famous cases. Okay, let's look at the Scott Peterson case. Okay, he had Mark Garagos. Okay, Mark Garagos is also very comfortable in a courtroom. It's like a native language. He's like fluent in the courtroom. Um, and I think just like John Pryor, I think Mark Garagos, he's a master of the case. He knows the case. He knows the facts of the case, upside and down. Okay, but I think that, and also I think Mark Garagos, he'll take his defense to the edge, But I think Mark Garagos is a little bit more likable in the courtroom. Okay, and I think Mark Garagos is likely to sort of come across as more favorable to a jury. Okay, another good example would be that famous case. I'm forgetting it's the Florida case where the Casey Anthony case. Okay, she had Jose Baez. Jose, am I forgetting his name? I hope I'm getting his name. I don't have time to edit this video, so I think it's Jose Baez. Okay, Jose Baez is also a sneaky, sly, really, really sly, really deceptive, sort of a magic. He sort of like does magic in the courtroom, right? Like I would say almost black magic, right? But Jose Baez, I think, is a little more likable than John Pryor. Okay, so John Pryor does have that one little thing, I think, compared to other famous, high profile, high risk, high stakes defense lawyers, where I think that if you really compare him even to like Johnny Cochran and all these famous, defense people that we've seen in high profile cases, I think John Pryor does have a little bit of a disadvantage, I think, an honest disadvantage, that he comes across as kind of whimpery, kind of simpery, kind of almost feminine. I would say when he gets kind of whiny, there's almost like a feminine tinge to his whininess, and he gets kind of irritated and impatient. And I think that that's not likely to come across favorable to all jurors. I think a lot of jurors might be turned off by John Pryor just because of the likability issue. But what he has in his favor, John Pryor, is that he's very seasoned and experienced, and he really, for him, the law is now a native language. He's not, whereas I think when you look at like the prosecution team, I think law is still a second language for those people, and that happens. It's like they're still sight reading. You know what I mean? If you understand what I'm saying. And whenever you're in any profession, if it's medicine, law, there's going to be like a long period, even more than 10 years, where the profession is not your native language. It's like a second language. So Pryor does have that advantage. I think even more than the judge, actually. I think Pryor is actually more seasoned even than the judge. So he does have some substantial advantages. Okay, but let's get to a little deeper. Okay, one of the things that strikes me, and I work in criminal defense. Okay, so I have always found it kind of mysterious. For me, it's actually, sorry about those dogs. Oh, God, I'm so sorry. I don't have time to edit this video. The dogs in this neighborhood are out of control, so I apologize. This is the worst video, but anyway. Something that's been mysterious to me since I've worked in the law, and I'll never understand it, because I'll never understand those secret conversations where the high, powerful lawyer has that secret conversation with a really guilty guy. Like how does the lawyer believe everything they say? Does the lawyer say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to tell you what I think, but I'm just going to defend you. Does the lawyer say, oh, yeah, I believe you? Or does the lawyer say, yes, I believe you're innocent? Like, what are those secret conversations when they sign the retainer and then they're just by themselves in that sacred space with that attorney-client privilege, with a really, let's say, a scary defendant, even I don't know. Okay, because I work in criminal defense, but I'm never privileged to those secret conversations where it's just the lawyer and the defendant, And from what I can tell, working personally with defense lawyers, okay, and having my own experience, I think it varies from lawyer to lawyer. Okay, I think some lawyers are like a doctor. Okay, a lawyer will say, look, my job is to protect you and to minimize your exposure and to minimize your consequences. Okay, so some lawyers will say, I don't really care whether you're innocent or guilty. I don't care. Okay, I'm looking at the evidence, right? So you can tell me you're innocent and you're going to pay me the big dollars. I'm not going to decide whether I think you're innocent. I'm looking at the evidence. Okay, so you think you're innocent, you may be innocent, but what if the evidence is going to kill you? So it's like being a doctor. It's like saying, look, you may think what you want. I'm looking at the x-rays and I'm looking at the pathology specimens. And even though you think you're fine, I see something wrong here. You know what I mean? Or I see danger, right? So I think some lawyers, they take the philosophy where in private, with their client, they're going to say, look, you're in trouble. You're in a lot of trouble. Okay. They found dead bodies in your yard. Okay. Whether we call it a pasture, whether we call it a pet cemetery, whatever we can do. I mean, it's your property. That's bad. Okay. Um, you say, your children say that you're being framed, you're being set up. We'll go with that. But I'm just telling you, the evidence looks bad. We'll do what we can, but you understand that you are exposed to the death penalty. Okay. So I think some lawyers do it like that. I think other lawyers, and I don't know how they do it, because these are lawyers that I guess I don't understand it, but some lawyers, they sort of believe whatever the client tells them, and they sort of fall into let's say, the family delusion. And I think in the case of Chad Daybell, I think he and his children are sort of locked in, and I think their religious denial mechanisms and their cultural inability to consider believing things that could really, let's say, harm, that could be really, let's say, unflattering to the family. I think that family is sort of locked into an accepted position where the whole family just accepts the position, and they've sort of bought into this position where they have no choice but to believe that their father is innocent and that he's been framed. Okay, and I think Chad is very comfortable with that, because I don't think Chad can even approach sort of exposing to his children that he might be involved in killing children or killing their mother. Okay. So I think Chad is kind of bought into this position, whether he likes it or not. And I think the children, even though they may have doubts subconsciously, I think the children are also bought into this position that Chad has been framed. Okay. And that's going to be the position, in defiance of all common sense. And I think that a defense attorney can probably read the room, and a defense attorney can probably sense that that's the family's position and that's what they want. Okay. Now, if I was an attorney, I'd say, look, I think I can tell what you guys are thinking. Okay. But unfortunately, the evidence, says things that could challenge that, or could, even though that may be true, even though I don't believe it, but even though that may be true, what you guys are saying, the evidence could lead to a verdict in the other direction. Right. So I think a good attorney would say, okay, I'm on board with you guys. My job is to defend you. However, the evidence may result the evidence may result in a verdict that sort of contradicts your family position. I mean, if you guys are all prepared for that, um, but the problem with that, though, regardless, I'm sorry, guys. Please, I'm about to say something important, I think. Okay, so here's the point. Here's the difficulty with the defense attorney. Okay, you're sort of paid to be like a professional sympathizer to the family position, right? And especially if we look at, like, say, the Barry Morphew case. Okay, he has lawyers that are just viciously in the face of all contradictory evidence. I mean, they even found like animal tranquilizers in Barry's dead wife's bones, and they're still just viciously, aggressively trying to suggest that somebody else could have killed her with a tranquilizer, even though he's the one that's like this massive user of that specific formula of animal tranquilizer. So you get these lawyers where they're sort of paid to put out in public like almost a laughably absurd spin on the facts. Okay, just almost like this rabid, like super aggressive, and really almost kind of unrealistic, but like super aggressive, like almost like a political campaign, right? Where they're just trying to spin this what appears to us to be almost like irresponsible, like unreasonable spin on the facts, right? And so this idea that Chad has been framed, I think we all can tell that just, you can entertain the idea, but it just doesn't seem like a very responsible position, right? And it seems like an open falsehood, like you're propagating a lie, right? So I think not every attorney can do what they're doing for Barry Morphew, right? Because Barry Morphew's in a position now where, because they found that exact tranquilizer that he's famous for using, and he uses a lot with his own personal life, and he's known to have that. He's known to have had that on the property, right? Barry Morphew, right? I think there's a lot of attorneys who would say, look, at this point, we're going to hurt you by propagating that spin, right? We're going to hurt you because we're going to build resentment in the public, and people are going to resent that we look like liars, right? But I think there are attorneys that, how would I say, I think because they're so, I guess some attorneys have that bizarre ethics where They feel like they're paid not to defend the client's interest, right? They feel like they're paid to sort of do whatever the client wants, or sort of to, I guess they feel like they're being paid to sort of buy into the delusions of the client and the client's family, right? And I think in that sense, I think sometimes a lawyer looks more like a codependent relative, it's like a codependent family member where they're paid to be a codependent. And in that sense, they're almost enabling something very self-destructive in the client, which is propagating something that most people can tell is just completely false, right? And so I'm sorry if I'm so not eloquent today, but I really, if you could just be patient. The point I'm trying to make here is that sometimes lawyers, in their effort to be zealous advocates and to zealously defend their clients, sometimes they slide into almost like a codependent enabling position where they enable a position on the facts, which is so obviously outrageous and so obviously ridiculous that it could actually enrage the public, okay? And it could actually result in worse consequences for the defendant, okay? And so I think this is the balance that attorneys have, is that, if I'm going to do everything you want me to do, if I'm going to buy into your delusions as a defendant, or if I'm going to buy into the way you want to spin the facts, or you believe the facts, okay, if we don't respect how these facts really look, okay, and if we just come across as just in this utter denial, okay, this almost like rabid, aggressive denial, which seems to be almost like an absurd position or a ridiculous position, okay, that could end up hurting the client, right? And so as an attorney, you have to decide at what point do you say this could hurt you, you know? And so this is very dangerous. This is very difficult, especially in a death penalty case, all right? Because in a death penalty case, obviously the client is facing the worst possible punishment. Although, let's be honest, in Idaho, I think death penalty is actually it's probably better than getting life in prison in Idaho, because if you get the death penalty in Idaho, that's a state that does not execute people. Okay, it's like getting the death penalty in California. You're not going to get executed, especially if you're over 50 years old. You're just not going to get executed. There's too many things that'll happen, and you're just not going to get executed. So if you get the death penalty, you get more resources from the state. You get more appellate resources from the state. Okay. So in a way, you don't really have anything to lose, right? If you really think your client looks very guilty, and if the evidence looks really bad against the client, you're not really scared of the death penalty in a place like Idaho. It's not Florida. It's not Texas. It's not Oklahoma. Okay, let's just be honest, all right? And even Arizona, for example, I mean, they're a little more aggressive with actually executing people, but really most people in Arizona, they don't get executed. So there's actually an advantage in a way to risking everything. Because if you actually do get the death penalty in a state like Idaho, the state is going to provide more appellate resources. Okay, there's so much more of an appellate mechanism when you actually get the death penalty. You get so many more appeals. You get to go through the federal system, the state system, all the habeas process, and I think there's more funding for defending somebody who gets the death penalty. So in a state like Idaho, you really have nothing to lose by just doing a maximum defense and taking the risk of offending the public, right? Offending the public with a clearly absurd defense position, right? So I think that's pretty much John Pryor's position, is that they have nothing to lose. The evidence looks terrible, okay? And I think if you really analyze, taking the risk, a guy like John Pryor, who's not a stupid guy, he's a smart guy. He's kind of annoying, his personality, but he's not a stupid guy. So if he's going to go for this absolute maximum aggression, maximum aggressive defense, where he's even risking looking like he's like an unlikable person, I think it's because he feels this case is so. I would say, I think this is my interpretation of John Pryor, is that for him to be that aggressive, that means that privately he knows that the evidence looks terrible against Chad. He knows that. Okay, so he knows that it's kind of like playing poker. You would prefer when you're playing poker to just bet like $5, $10, $100, $200. Okay, I'll raise you 100. I'll raise you 100. But in this case, the nature of the case is that the state is going like all in, okay, and they got a stack of chips, right? So John Pryor doesn't have the luxury of playing $5 and $10 chips, right? The state has already put $2 million on the table of chips, like we're all in. So John Pryor has no choice. He can't play small ball poker, right? He can't just put a $10, $100, $200 chip. He's got to put also his 5 million whatever chips. He's just got to go all in. So that might explain why he's being so extreme in all his objections, and he's even he's getting right up to the border of crossing every ethical line by even providing testimony in the way he asks questions. Right, he'll ask a question where he's actually testifying, trying to inject a narrative, right? And he's doing that because there's nothing to lose. He has to be as aggressive as possible, including fouling and even committing some things, playing dirty, let's say playing dirty. He has to put all his chips on the table because there's nothing else he can do. He has to play the most aggressive game possible because the evidence looks terrible. And I think, do I really think John Pryor thinks he's going to get like an acquittal? Okay, no. And remember, like let's take the O.J. Simpson case. O.J. Simpson got an acquittal, but why did O.J. Simpson get an acquittal? Was it because 2 or 3 jurors were like stubborn and it was like a hung jury or what? No. The reason was because O.J. Simpson got his trial set in downtown Los Angeles, all right at the time of the Rodney King incident, the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles. And there was so much resentment among Black people in Los Angeles that resentment sort of allowed them to sort of it was almost like a protest vote, right? So I think had O.J. Simpson actually been tried in a court in his neighborhood where he was from, there's no question he would have been guilty, right? Or at least there would have been a hung jury, right? Not an acquittal. But in this case, in Idaho, I think Chad. I think the evidence is so bad against Chad. I think he's so clearly guilty. I don't think you'll get an acquittal. So what is Pryor trying to do? If he doesn't think he's going to get an acquittal, I think what Pryor is trying to do is he's trying to put all his chips on the table on the chance that he might get a hung jury. Okay, a hung jury. Okay, and if he doesn't get a hung jury, I think he doesn't really care if Chad gets the death penalty. And I think he's told Chad not to worry about the death penalty, because if Chad does get the death penalty, there's going to be tons more appellate resources behind him. Okay, and like we've seen with the Scott Peterson, Scott Peterson, he's clearly guilty. I'm sorry. That's my opinion, right? But he got so much appellate resources because he was on the death row. He was on death row that they actually did end up finding, they scrutinized his case and they did this mega appeal, and they did find some issues, just whatever issues, like say with the jurors. But if it's not with the jurors, there'll be some other issue. Okay. So my prediction is that John Pryor, he's trying to go for a hung jury. Okay, he just wants to get maybe one religious guy on the jury, one male, kind of older male guy who might be a little bit religious, who might just kind of sympathize with Chad, and maybe just for whatever reason, he's just going to buy into he's going to drink the Kool-Aid and think there's not enough evidence to completely convict Chad. And obviously the theory is going to be that, that to some extent, Lori and Alex were sort of operating on their own and they were doing some renegade stuff and they wanted to pin some stuff on Chad. And also I think the theories, they're going to put a suggestion out there that maybe the Rexburg police had a thing out for Chad because there was a family member of Tammy who was actually in the police force, right? So they sort of had a motive to want to frame Chad. Okay. So, I mean, hey, I don't buy it, but I think they're thinking that maybe they can find one maybe older male juror, if there's a juror that's like over 50, who's kind of religious, who might have some sympathy for fundamentalist people, whatever. I think they're sort of holding out. I think John Pryor is holding out that they might get a hung jury, and otherwise it's just full chips on the table. And if Chad does get the death penalty, I think they just believe, well, that'll be better because nobody gets executed in Idaho. And finally, if you do get the death penalty, there's just more appellate resources, lots of appellate resources. So he'll have a stronger appeal, basically. So that's pretty much my assessment. And whether do I think in private, do I think John Pryor believes everything Chad's family believes? That is a mystery. That's a mystery. I think John Pryor, just like Barry Morphew's attorney, I think he's coming across like a bulldog, like he believes everything the family's saying, right? That's how he presents, right? But I think we can say that in private, we'll never know, right? Because I think a good attorney knows that they have to make the client feel represented, right? They have to make the client feel like they're getting sympathy from the attorney, that the attorney's fighting for their position, all right? But would I accuse John Pryor of maybe putting Chad in a bad position by not doing a plea bargain, by maybe being a little too zealous, maybe being a little too unlikable? Okay, in this case, no. I don't think Pryor is making a mistake, because if Pryor were to bargain Chad into a life sentence through a plea bargain, okay, there would be no appeal. Okay, and there wouldn't be the same level of appellate resources. Okay, so they don't have the option of plea bargaining in this case. If you plea bargain, he's bargaining for a life sentence, right? And if you think about it, in Idaho, if you actually get the death penalty, you actually are maybe in, you have more of a chance for the appellate process to come up with something to reverse something, and to get maybe more taken off. Okay, you know what I'm saying? So like, if you just plea bargain for a life sentence, basically, and you could even be forfeiting some appellate rights when you do that. It's better, I think, considering what Chad is facing, right? And considering how bad the evidence looks, it's better for John Pryor just to put all chips on the table, no plea bargain, and just accept that he may get the death penalty. I mean, he'll get a paper that says the death penalty, right? He's not going to get executed. He will not get executed. Okay. What'll happen is once he gets on death row, if that's what happens, all right, there'll just be tons of appellate resources. And also Chad will also have that advantage on death row of not having to mix in general population. So there's a lot of actual weird advantages if you think about it. But one thing we have to be careful about, if you're in Texas, that's different. If you're in Florida, that's different, right? But if you're in a state like California or Idaho, death row is actually almost an advantage because you have way more appellate resources. Okay, so that's kind of my position. And then also too, I think John Pryor has his own personal interests. He's not going to get paid a lot of money from Chad, although we can ask the question, because Chad may be connected to a lot of people sort of under the table that we don't know about. Chad may have marshaled some funding for John Pryor that we don't even know about, and how he got that, I don't know, So maybe John Pryor is getting more than just a house out of this. But, on the off chance that John Pryor is only getting the house, what is John Pryor getting out of this? He's getting a lot, because he's going in public and he's showing himself in public as a guy who's a bulldog all the way. Okay, he's a bulldog all the way. And I think some people realize that that's worth something, And so I think he's trying to develop his own reputation. I think John Pryor, he's getting a lot of international exposure. And so I think he wants to, make sure that his reputation is sealed as a guy who will fight like hell for his clients. So, in a way, this is like free advertising for John Pryor, But as far as whether there's been a mistake, whether maybe John Pryor is believing too much in the family, he's like becoming a codependent enabler of Chad. John Pryor has no choice, okay, because the state has a stack of poker chips. And the only thing you can do when someone puts a stack of poker chips, you can either fold or you can put your stack of poker chips. And so John Pryor is just fighting as hard as he can because he has no other choice, okay? And so do I think he's a good lawyer? He could be more likable. That's true. He's not Mark Garagos, okay? Let's just be honest. But overall, I think he's very fluent in the courtroom. I think he knows what he's doing, and I think he has no choice. I think he has to follow this strategy. So, what do I predict? I think Chad, I don't even think Chad's going to get the death penalty, to be quite honest. I think the jury will probably convict him. But I think, and I can't say if they'll convict him on every count, but I think he'll get convicted on at least 2 counts of murder. All right. But I have a funny feeling that the jury will be inclined probably not to give him the death penalty unless John Pryor does a strategic move where he sort of doesn't fight hard enough on purpose in the sentencing phase, because he feels like it's almost an advantage for Chad to get the death penalty. I mean, that's sneaky as hell, but who knows? We'll see. But, do I think John Pryor is a good lawyer? I think overall, I'm going to have to say he's pretty good. That's my overall assessment. Anyway, sorry about the quality of this video. Sometimes I'm really not eloquent, but thanks for watching and thanks for your patience.